Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
When governments routinely used to boost the levies on cigarettes and booze to bring in more revenue, they were colloquially called sin taxes. Tonight, we've got two stories on how those sins tax those that partake in other ways. First, we're examining the link between alcohol and cancer. Then, what a new book reveals about why smoking remains so popular in this country, even as evidence of its dangers mounted. It's Wednesday, February 10th, and that's tonight on the agenda. There is no easy way to say this. Your evening libation may come with some hazards you aren't aware of. That's probably the last thing anyone wants to hear in what feels like month 1000 of a pandemic, where a nip at the end of a long day may be a source of some comfort or even fun. But as the Canadian Cancer Society's current Dry Feb initiative highlights, drinking alcohol can apparently add to your risk level for cancer, among other dangers. With us to explain, we welcome in Victoria, British Columbia, Tim Stockwell. He's a scientist at the Canadian Institute for Substance Use Research and a professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Victoria. Back here in the province of Ontario, in the beaches of the provincial capital, Aaron Hoban, scientist at Public Health Ontario, with appointments at the U of T's Dalla School of Public Health and the Canadian Institute for Substance Use Research. And in Lawrence Park, just north of our Midtown studio, there's Dr. Leslie Buckley, Chief of Addictions at CAMH, the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health. And we're really glad to have all of you three on our program this evening. I want to set up our discussion, if I can, by just reading this. Sheldon, if you would, let's bring up the graphic and I'll go through it here. The sobering news is that drinking any amount of alcohol increases cancer risk. Alcohol increases your risk of head and neck, breast, stomach, pancreatic, colorectal, and liver cancers. If more Canadians limit their alcohol intake, we could prevent about 44,300 cancer cases by the year 2042. Aaron Hoban, why don't you get us started here? What is the definitive link between alcohol and cancer?
The World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer classified alcohol as a Group 1 carcinogen, the highest level of risk, in 1988. And as you just showed in your graphic there, alcohol has been confirmed to increase the risk of at least 7 types of cancers, so cancers of the digestive tract as well as female breast. And there are multiple pathways by which alcohol can increase your risk for different types of cancers depending on the organ affected. But generally, the ethanol in alcohol is metabolized in the body into acetaldehyde, which then binds with and damages the body's DNA and proteins.
And Aaron, let me do a follow-up with you. You know, sometimes we hear about these things and then it comes out in the fine print afterwards that you'd have to drink 25 bottles of wine a day for it, in fact, to be carcinogenic. Most people don't do that. In fact, I don't know anybody who does that. So what intake are we talking for this to be problematic?
So definitely the more alcohol you drink, the higher your risk. However, the most recent evidence is suggesting that even light and moderate amounts of alcohol can increase your risk of cancer by small amounts. And it is also important to note that all types of alcoholic beverages, whether it's beer, wine, spirits, coolers, or hard liquor, contain ethanol, which can increase your risk for cancer.
Tim Stockwell, what groups would you say are most at risk for alcohol-related cancer?
It doesn't really spare any of us. I mean, clearly for breast cancer, women are the main risk. In fact, 1 or 2 men get breast cancer. One of the cancers that's not mentioned in the standard list is prostate cancer. And there's increasing evidence that starting from a low dose, the risk of prostate cancer for men increases. So it's basically all of us. And in later years, because these risks tend to take a while to accumulate, we have to expose our body multiple times over the years. usually. I mean, it's a lottery. It's just your chance of getting an alcohol-related cancer increase as you get older.
Well, speaking of lottery, would genetics therefore play a role in any of this?
I believe so. I mean, we're all genetically predisposed to different diseases, and cancer's no exception.
Okay, Dr. Leslie, how about stress? What role would stress play in any of this?
So one thing we know about stress and drinking is that they're linked. So we can see, in the neurochemistry that when stress levels increase, we can see centers that we know are responsible for craving lighting up. So we know that, even from a biological level, stress is an important factor. And certainly I think that everyone is experiencing in the pandemic, we're seeing increased alcohol use, and we know that stress is the leading factor for that.
Aaron, what about the notion that we used to hear in the past, which was that one glass of wine over dinner, never mind wouldn't hurt you, but actually had some medicinal value to it?
That's a very good question, and that often comes up because that is a common belief among the general public. But there is very convincing evidence that has been published recently that challenges that belief and actually shows that any type of alcohol, whether it's red wine, can indeed increase all alcohol-related health harms, including cancer.
So the new recommendation is not even a glass of wine over dinner?
So in Canada, we have the National Low-Risk Drinking Guidelines, which provides daily and weekly limits for both men and women. So under these guidelines, women are advised to drink no more than 2 drinks per day or 10 drinks per week, and men are advised to drink no more than 3 drinks per day or 15 drinks per week.
Okay, we're going to follow up on this some more, but first we've got a little excerpt from the Globe and Mail here that we want to read in the meantime. So Sheldon, if you would, let's bring this up, and here we go. A report by the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction estimated that nearly a third of Canadian drinkers already consume more than the current weekly recommendations. Even by international standards, Canada falls on the boozy side. According to the World Health Organization, Canadians drink 8.9 litres of pure alcohol, that's about 9 bags of milk worth, per capita each year. That's well above the global average of 6.2 litres. Once again, we're at 8.9 and 6.2 is the recommendation. Tim Stockwell, how concerned are you about those numbers?
I'm very familiar with these numbers, and in fact, they underestimate the extent to which, unfortunately, Canadians don't comply with the guidelines. The problem is that when we measure how much people drink and they self-report in surveys, and you count up all the drinks that they report, it's about a third of the alcohol known to be sold. So the problem we're having here is that these are underestimates from self-report. In fact, when we've crunched the numbers, taking account of underreporting, roughly 75% of all the alcohol consumed in Canada is drunk in a way that is outside of those guidelines.
All right. Well, Leslie, let me follow up with you on this. The guidelines that have been in place for a decade, and again, that's sort of 2 drinks a day on average for a woman, 3 drinks a day on average for a man. Do you think those numbers are out of date today?
I think it's so hard to determine the right numbers because you're balancing the risk of, the cancer and other harms that can happen with alcohol with the relevance. So, if we were really just thinking of risk, we would say 0. And if we were, we're balancing that with relevance. And when you compare us to other countries, we are high with our numbers. So it's very likely that we will probably change and begin to match some of the other countries who have lower guidelines than us right now.
And I don't know if you've got hard stats on this, because after all, it's less than a year, but is it your impression anyway, or do you have stories from patients about whether or not we're drinking more during the pandemic?
Multiple, different studies have shown that we are drinking more during the pandemic, and alcohol sales are up as well. So we're recognizing that there's been an escalation, yes.
Tim, I saw you nodding your head at that as well. You've got it categorically confirmed we are drinking more these days.
Yeah, I've been looking at the sales data as well as self-report data, but the sales clearly show, particularly during the first lockdown, the data show here in BC about a 7% increase, and we found consistent increases in most provinces. And stress is part of it, but it's also the convenience of access. For the first time, alcohol is now delivered to our doorsteps in many parts of Canada.
And let's follow up with this. I mean, binge drinking, obviously binge drinking is not a great idea, but do you want to go into some more detail about why it's so harmful to you?
Well, there's multiple aspects to that. I mean, clearly the risks from alcohol are about safety as well, risks of accidents and injuries, but it's also the assault on our bodies. So the kind of risks, the mechanisms that Erin was describing about how alcohol can cause cancer, if you get a series of acute assaults on your digestive system, for example, the body has to work harder to heal itself, and the risk of it failing to replicate itself, our body is regenerating all the time. And if you're daily assaulting it in a sort of binge style, high blood alcohol concentration, the body has to work harder, and there's greater risks of it failing to replicate itself and tumors developing.
Erin, I think the police do a pretty good job at keeping the statistics on alcohol-related tragedies on our roads. We probably have a pretty good understanding of alcohol-caused deaths on the roads. But I wonder whether the medical community keeps those kinds of statistics for alcohol-related deaths in hospitals, for example.
Tim Stockwell's group actually published a fascinating paper in 2020 on this exact topic. So maybe he could speak to some of the results published in his paper.
Sure, Tim, go ahead.
We do have a study. It's called the Canadian Substance Use Costs and Harms Study. We monitor it. We can find all the data on a website. The total number of deaths each year related to alcohol that would not have occurred without alcohol consumption, we estimate to be at least 18,000. And that was in the last year we looked at this. It may be up to 19 or 20,000 now. Of those, about a quarter would be cancer related. Maybe 7,000 or 8,000 would be related to some kind of injury or accident.
All right, we are in February, and the Canadian Cancer Society has decided in its wisdom that it has come up with a new idea for getting people to drink less, and that is this notion of dry Feb, dry Februaries. Don't drink alcohol in February. That's what they're suggesting. And we're going to roll just a little bit of their public service announcement to that end. Sheldon, if you would.
Well, it's certainly been an interesting year. And like many of us, maybe you've been drinking more than usual and want to take a break. With Dry Feb, you can.
Why not challenge yourself to go dry in February to help raise funds for the Canadian Cancer Society?
Sign up for Dry Feb, and not only will you be helping people affected by cancer,
you can also reduce your risk of cancer.
Go as dry as you're willing to try this February. Sign up today. It's easier than you think.
Well, Leslie Buckley, admittedly, we're not that far into February yet, but any sense about whether this is working?
I think it's having an impact in a few ways. One is in the media. So people are picking up on the issue of alcohol. It sort of highlights the issue and gets us thinking a little bit about it as a society, but also as individuals. And it's a sort of an invitation to set a goal. What's unique about Dry Feb compared to what happens in some other countries and Dry Jan is that usually it's an absolute dryness, but this one allows for your own goal. And what will be interesting will be to see if it sticks.
Erin, any sense in your community or in your world about whether or not these kinds of campaigns are useful?
I think this approach is very interesting. Some of our work has shown that about 25% of Canadian adults who drink alcohol actually know that consuming alcohol increases their risk for cancer. And this low public awareness in Canada is consistent internationally in the evidence. So I'm very hopeful that campaigns such as the one that the Canadian Cancer Society is running will increase the public awareness of the link between alcohol and cancer.
Tim Stockwell, your view on the campaign?
There's been good work done on this in other countries, and people report fantastic benefits, even if they're just moderate drinkers. The tendency is for people who complete the month to say they sleep better, they experience less stress, they're taking more exercise, they're saving money. And interestingly, it's not just a one-off. There tends to be a consistent, long-lasting effect where they drink a little bit less in the following months and years, which reduces their risks of diseases.
Tim, you talk about saving money. Let me just do a quick follow-up on that, because, of course, I don't know if a study has ever been done on the money saved in terms of healthcare down the road versus the money that the Treasury loses in the short run, because people are not, in Ontario, for example, going to the Liquor Control Board of Ontario or the beer store to buy. Do we have any idea about how that works itself out?
Yes, we do actually. In fact, with a colleague, we published stats on that last year for each jurisdiction. On average, across the whole of Canada, the costs exceed the revenue taken. So the revenue covers about 75% of the costs of healthcare, police, and lost productivity. And in Ontario is no exception, and there's no single jurisdiction in Canada that doesn't have an alcohol deficit.
So just so I'm super clear on this, because we hear this all the time around budget time. We hear that it's good that people imbibe because that money goes into the Treasury to pay for roads and schools and hospitals and so on and so forth. But you're saying that if everybody stopped drinking tomorrow, we'd actually be ahead when it comes to money.
Absolutely. There'd be a bit of a shock to the whole, the structure of our economy, because alcohol is tied up with a lot of things. But just strictly the bottom line, we'd be ahead. A lot more would be saved than would be lost from, the costs of running hospitals and making the roads safe, and there'd be less pressure on the criminal justice system, more productivity. That would be way ahead than the revenue that we'd lose.
All right, Aaron, pick up the story from there, because, on the one hand, we've got this public service announcement from the Cancer Society, and that's all well and good, but it is competing against billions upon billions of dollars in advertisements, in sponsoring events, in all kinds of things that obviously encourage us to drink more. So how do you like its chances?
Alcohol advertising in this country is pervasive. Anyone who's watched Hockey Night in Canada can attest to that. And the evidence shows that alcohol advertising influences societal norms as well as beliefs and perceptions about alcohol, particularly among adolescents and young adults. And as you said, reports show that the alcohol industry spends billions of dollars every year on advertising, and this spend is now largely spent on new media, so celebrity endorsements, event and sports sponsorship, as well as social and online media. And the intent of this type of advertising is to interact and develop positive relationships with current and future consumers. Just to underscore the important role that alcohol advertising plays in driving alcohol use, the World Health Organization has identified 3 most cost-effective policies for reducing alcohol use and related harms. And one of those 3 is to ban or comprehensively restrict alcohol advertising.
Okay, ban and restrict advertising. Let me go even further. I well remember the time in this province when you couldn't buy a beer at a baseball game. Today we have a different problem. You can't go to a baseball game at all. But let's assume that when baseball comes back, Labatt's used to own the Blue Jays, for example. I mean, a brewery owned the baseball team. Can you imagine anybody turning the clock back and saying, no more beer sales at ball games, no more beer sales at hockey games? I mean, is that reasonable?
I mean, in Canada, alcohol is such a part of our culture, our daily fabric. It's completely normalized in our everyday lives. So I think it would be very difficult to do something that extreme, where we're not allowing alcohol at entertainment, at our events. One potential sort of first step is to more broadly promote Canada's low-risk drinking guidelines, to promote consuming alcohol in moderation or safer levels of risk.
Well, that's an interesting approach. So, Leslie Buckley, in terms of your recommendations, for example, as a medical doctor, would you say better to just arm your patients and the broader population with the knowledge that if they drink too much, they could be encouraging cancer, or better to have governments come in and legislate an end to, for example, alcohol sales at baseball stadiums?
The most effective option is the latter. So we know that the most powerful lever is accessibility. And that includes locations you can purchase alcohol, hours you can purchase alcohol, and price. So, as much as the other factors may be helpful as well in terms of trying to reduce and improving education, we know that really in the end, nothing competes with those levers.
Okay, Tim Stockwell, let me get you to follow up. A prohibition on alcohol sales at all sporting events in the country. What politician is going to go to the electorate with that?
They won't. At this stage, I think we need both education and regulatory approaches. We need labels on alcohol containers warning of cancer risk and promoting guidelines in order to make people realize this matters. We can't just suddenly impose heavy restrictions on what people are used to doing without them understanding the reason. So all of the effect, we need minimum prices to be increased. That's the most effective thing that could be done. We need to look at convenience of access, but we need to give people the reason for why we're doing this, because like 75% of them are not aware alcohol is a carcinogen. So we have to work hard on both fronts.
I shouldn't admit to this, but Tim, I do remember the days, for example, at Iverwin Stadium in Hamilton, going to a Ticats game when sales were prohibited. I mean, there was no alcohol sales. People snuck it in. People snuck Mickeys in. People want to drink. I mean, is this really, is it even possible to legislate this out of existence?
Well, look, there are intermediate strategies, and I've seen them work. I used to follow cricket. Probably a lot of people watching have no idea what that sport is or what the rules are. But when I lived in Australia, you could only buy a limited amount of beer, and you could only buy it in a plastic, have it served in a plastic glass, so there would be fewer glass-related injuries. There wouldn't be broken glass. People wouldn't be using them as weapons. And you can restrict the number of drinks people can buy. So there are intermediate strategies that work.
Leslie, let me follow up on the labeling issue, because we know that over the course of time, the labels, for example, on cigarettes, the Surgeon General's warnings, those pictures have become increasingly gruesome over the years, and I guess the thinking is that they have encouraged some people not to smoke. Do you think we need those kinds of stark labels on alcohol?
I think that we should look to smoking cessation, in terms of models that will work, because it was incredibly effective. And, if we can transfer that effectiveness to alcohol, we'd have to study it again, because we can't assume that it would work in the same way with the gruesome photos. But, to start with labels, that clearly identify the risks. Think about something like you just suggested with a stronger visual, getting rid of all marketing on alcohol. I think we would be moving ourselves ahead.
Erin, what's your view on increasingly stark labeling on alcohol?
So actually, Tim and I collaborated with the governments in Yukon and Northwest Territories to experimentally test large, bright yellow alcohol labels with 3 rotating messages: a cancer warning, Canada's low-risk drinking guidelines, and the number of standard drinks in an alcohol container. And these labels were applied to all alcohol containers sold in the liquor store in Whitehorse. And after the 8-month intervention period, our results showed that consumers in our intervention site had higher odds of knowing the link between alcohol and cancer and Canada's low-risk drinking guidelines. And compared to our comparison site that wasn't exposed to the labels, and using official government sales data, we observed that alcohol sales in our intervention site were reduced by 6% relative to 2 separate control sites without the labels. So The results overwhelmingly show that well-designed alcohol labels can support consumers in making more informed and safer alcohol choices, similar to the effectiveness of tobacco labels.
Tim, again, I see you nodding. You're in favor of tougher labeling on that type of thing?
Well, some labelling. I think the absence of it signals this doesn't matter. I mean, I think people must think subconsciously, well, the government would warn me if this was a serious health risk. And alcohol gets a free ride on so many levels. Producers don't have to say how many calories are in alcohol, which is outrageous. So here is a grade 1 carcinogen and we're not warned about it. The government is in the business of selling it and distributing it for sale. And the least it could do is to inform its citizens of the risks of that. And they could actually be exposed to litigation. There could be civil lawsuits, like there have been with alcohol against the tobacco manufacturers. But for the failure, there's a duty of care to warn citizens, and they have a right to know.
I'm sure there are people watching this and listening to it on podcast who will remember, and you probably got to go back, gosh, I don't know, is it 30 years ago? Maybe it's more, when cigarette advertising was legal and cigarette companies could sponsor sporting events and tennis championships and auto racing and that kind of thing. And then it all got banned. And I wonder whether or not you think, and I'll get the three of you on this, whether you think that step is necessary for alcohol. Do we need to ban advertising? Do we need to ban the sponsorship of public events? Dr. Buckley, you go first on that.
I would agree with the ban. I do have a distant memory of those days. And, to pick up on Tim's point about the subconscious plays a big role in terms of, decision-making around alcohol, because we know that someone's perception of the harm of a substance really will factor in on how much they consume. So if society is allowing advertising and it seems just great, that's going to creep into our subconscious and affect our behavior.
Aaron, I do remember at the time people were saying, you know what, this is going to be the end of sports. This will be the end of auto racing. This will be the end of tennis. If you take away this kind of sponsorship money, they'll all fail. They didn't fail, obviously. But is it appropriate to ban the advertising of what is essentially, at the end of the day, a legally sold product in the country?
Well, I mean, sticking with the evidence, it is well established that alcohol advertising and marketing increases per capita alcohol use and harm. So if that is our priority to reduce consumption and harms, then I think we do have to consider a ban or at least some restrictions or stronger restrictions on alcohol advertising.
Tim, how about you? Advertising and sponsorship, where are you on that?
I'm in agreement. I think probably all of the listeners would, if you ask them, does advertising affect you? Most people say no. I'm not affected by advertising. It's this subconscious effect. And there's been studies showing that 5-year-old children, if you show them an image of their favorite sporting events and blanked out advertising billboards, they can fill them in and draw pictures of whether it's cigarette cartons or beer containers, whatever the issue is. So the subconscious effect on our desire to consume alcohol starts at a very early age. And it wouldn't be a multi-billion-dollar industry if it didn't work. So yeah, it's very effective at increasing our consumption and our risk of cancer as a result.
I'm going to ask Aaron and Leslie a very mischievous question here because, well, you two are sort of public servants and are paid by the government of Ontario. And therefore, I want to ask you whether you think the government of Ontario's efforts to liberalize the sale of alcohol during this pandemic, curbside delivery and so on and so forth, what you think the impact of that has been. Aaron, you first.
Well, the evidence, the work that Tim is doing and some work that our team is doing has shown that alcohol sales have increased by about 7% in Canada during the pandemic. And there is very strong evidence showing that increasing the physical availability of alcohol is associated with increased sales and use.
Leslie Buckley, your view?
So, I think it's complicated with government because they're often responding to the public or what they believe the public thinks. This trend has been going on, even prior to this government. So it's not new. It's concerning to everybody who's, working in our field. And maybe a strategy is to educate the public more so that they will, be more knowledgeable and maybe support different policies that the governments might consider.
In which case, if you are having this conversation with your patients, how do you advise them on, if they can't go cold turkey all at once, how do you advise them to drink less?
Well, that's a great question. It's, something to think about is just whether it's safe. So depending on how much you're drinking a lot for many years, you should connect with your family doctor before you try to stop or slow down. If you want to just slow down, then, best approach is the numbers. Numbers don't lie, and it's a great way to, even just counting helps people reduce. You can alternate your drinks. So if you have one drink that has alcohol in it, your next drink is a soda or soda water. It just gives you time until your next drink, and the idea being that you would consume less over the night. So those are a couple of tips that a lot of people find useful.
Erin, if you're a moderate drinker, is it a good idea to just go cold turkey and stop drinking and embrace this Dry Feb campaign?
Yeah, I echo what Dr. Buckley just discussed. Canada's low risk drinking guidelines also provide some very similar and useful tips for people who are looking to cut down on their drinking.
Now, I gather, Tim, we're going to see new guidelines from the federal government and the provinces. When is it? Next year, I guess. And on the chance somebody's watching right now, what advice would you like to give them about where you'd like to see the guidelines go?
I'm actually on the panel that's, as is Erin, working out what the current state of knowledge is and what the best advice is. And I think the cautious thing to say now is to drink within the present guidelines, definitely not above them. They're likely to go down because we know more about the cancer risk, and we have stronger reasons to doubt that there are any health benefits. The previous guidelines balance one against the other and said if you drink within these levels, the risk of harm is balanced by your likelihood of getting benefit. Well, there may not be any benefit, and the risk seems to be worse than we previously realized. So the more you drink, less is good is probably the right answer.
We often say that in journalism, less is more. Okay, we're less than 2 minutes to go here, and Erin, let me put this to you. I imagine there have been people who been watching us for the last half an hour and say, look, you got to die of something. And, if the average age life expectancy for a man these days is, I don't know what it is 81 or 82 or 3 or something like that now? And so if I end up dying at 78, 79 or 80 instead of 81, 2 or 3, but I get to have a few nips along the way, that's a price I'm content to pay. What would you say to that person?
People enjoy drinking. Talking about the risks associated with drinking is not a popular topic at a dinner party. I think what I would tell people is that Canada has the low risk drinking guidelines, which provide limits for safer alcohol consumption, and drinking within those guidelines will support in lowering your risk for any types of alcohol related harms.
Tim, last word to you. What's the point of living to 85 if you can never have a scotch and soda?
Well, no one's saying you could never have one, but I'd love to know how many Canadians would say they wouldn't even give up 6 months of their lifespan. Or would they be prepared to give up 5 or 10 years? On average, exceeding the guidelines will knock 4 or 5 years off your lifespan if you do that consistently. I'd love to know whether that matters to people. So I think people should have the choice.
You have all educated us terrifically tonight here on TVO. Thanks to Tim Stockwell, Erin Hoban, and Dr. Leslie Buckley. Stay safe out there, everybody. And, I assume, can I see a show of hands? Who's doing Dry Feb? None of you. Sorry. Oh, that's hilarious. Okay. Well, thank you anyway for showing up on TVO tonight. Appreciate it very much. Tomorrow on the agenda.
I think it's the beginning of a sea change in psychiatry and in medicine that is mind-blowing, because think of it this way, Steve, when a patient goes into a clinic, a psychiatric clinic, sees a psychiatrist, really we're still thinking in pretty narrow terms in terms of chemical imbalance in the brain, and that is, I'm very much for, and you know, if antidepressants help people, I think it's fantastic. I think it's a wonderful tool in the toolbox. I think it's saved a lot of lives. But it's one way of thinking. And now that we have this understanding that there may be this very big underlying neuroimmune issue in the immune health of the brain, we can begin to think about brain health with many more tools.
That's tomorrow on the agenda. There was a time when almost 50% of Canadians smoked cigarettes on a daily basis. Half. That's fallen substantially now to below 20%, but in its heyday, smoking seemed ubiquitous and unstoppable. Why? Well, that's the subject of Daniel Robinson's new book. It's called Cigarette Nation: Business, Health, and Canadian Smokers, 1930 to 1975. He's an historian and associate professor in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at Western University in London. And Daniel Robinson joins us now from Midtown in the provincial capital. And I'm delighted to see you're not smoking. How are you today?
I'm doing fine, thanks.
Good, glad to hear it. I want to take you back to the turn of the last century when the House of Commons, you tell us in your book, actually passed a bill banning the sale and production and importation of cigarettes. Clearly that didn't happen, so what did happen?
Well, that came about because there was a group called the Women Christians Temperance Union that were promoting or advocating for cigarette bans. And they thought that cigarettes were immoral and that young people it would be like a gateway vice for them. They'd end up drinking and being truant and gambling and the rest. So they were pushing for this a lot in the early 1900s. The issue here was that the cabinet didn't really want to do this bill, and the prime minister did not. And frankly, the tobacco industry lobbied pretty effectively against it. So the compromise was that in 1908, they agreed to a law that would ban the sale of cigarettes to people under 16. And the WCTU kept pushing for this, but by World War I, this was effectively over because World War I showed that cigarettes were quite vital and important for soldiers who were overseas.
Let me take you to World War II now, where there becomes really a concerted effort to target women to smoke more. Tell us about how that happened.
Well, women start smoking in large numbers in the 1930s and during World War II. So if to go back to the 30s, this was actually the period when advertisers first start targeting women. It was thought before that time that it was socially improper for women to smoke in public. And so what you see is a number of advertising campaigns targeting women in the 30s and 40s. You also see women depicted in Hollywood films smoking a lot. Actresses like Jean Harlow and Mae West and Marlene Dietrich. And they presented these glamorized, very sexualized, dynamic portrayals of women as smokers. And so if you were a young woman sitting in the audience looking up in the 1930s, you might be thinking, I mean, how am I going to develop a sense of self-identity and a persona? And you're looking up at the screen and you're seeing this wonderful, dynamic female star smoking, and you might be thinking, I want some of that. And so the question becomes, why not smoke? And this carries into World War II. Women smoking rates start to rise considerably during the Second World War as well.
Yeah, let's stick with World War II because cigarette smoking clearly becomes an important and accepted part of Canadian soldiers' daily routines. Here's a little excerpt from the book on that. More than chocolate, you write, more than chocolate, beer, or candy, cigarettes, especially Canadian ones, were integral to the sensual, psychological, and social experiences of preparing for and waging war. How so, Daniel?
Well, war is a very stressful time, obviously, especially for the combatants. So cigarettes were a way of relieving that stress. They were lightweight. They were non-perishable. You could use them, travel with them during mobile military campaigns. So they were a very practical and useful item for soldiers to have during the war. But I think more interestingly, the cigarettes that soldiers received generally came as gifts from family members or friends back home and other institutions back home. So they were not bought through military canteens or through military ration. And so that meant that when you got these cigarettes, there was a sort of sense of gratitude and mutual obligation that went with that. The cigarette sharing and giving actually cemented ties between soldiers and the home front. These cigarettes, in turn, were shared with other soldiers, and that enhanced the kind of social belonging and social cohesion of the men in these military units. It made for them, it helped them become a band of brothers, so to speak. And it arguably enhanced their fighting effectiveness, because the more socially attached you are to the men in your unit, the more likely you are to have their backs and to fight hard for them. So cigarettes were very important in that sense. I mean, they were important for POWs as well.
Right. Let's move the story along. We'll go forward another couple of decades to the 1960s, and tobacco executives suddenly decide we're going to target those under the age of 18. Tell us about that.
So in the 1960s, the industry comes to realize that teenagers were a very important demographic group. You see this reflected in one instance by Imperial Tobacco, the largest tobacco company, lowering the minimum age in their surveys from 18 to 15. They start asking these teens what they like about sports, what they like about social activities. They ask them what brands they smoke. They do a whole host of market research to figure out what makes these young people tick. And then they start doing focus groups and other types of research to figure out what advertising would work best. They do all this because there's a realization within the industry in the 60s and 70s that the long-term success of a brand is linked to how effectively you get that brand into the hands of starter smokers. A starter smoker is typically someone under 18. So someone smoking players, for example, when they're 15 or 16, are likely to continue smoking that brand when they get into their 20s and beyond. So that's how you build up long-term success, by getting the brand into the hands of young people. The problem for the industry is that their own advertising code forbade them from marketing to people under 18. And they would publicly deny that they were doing this. And they certainly didn't want people to know, because they were concerned the government would step in and regulate them more stringently if it was known that they were marketing to teens.
Let me ask a frightfully naive question, which is, was nobody concerned about the immorality of doing that at the time?
Not so much, and I've looked at a lot of industry documents with that respect. Very little concern is expressed in that way. It's usually more concern about what your competitors are doing in terms of getting an added advantage in that respect.
And what were the consequences of marketing directly to 14, 15, 16-year-olds?
Well, at the time, there weren't really a lot of consequences. Later, there are consequences in terms of the litigation that has happened with the industry. And in fact, marketing to teens is one of the primary reasons for why the industry has found itself in hot water in terms of some of these lawsuits.
Let me take you to 1968 now. The current Prime Minister's father is the Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Trudeau, and he puts a guy from Hamilton in his cabinet named John Munro, who becomes the Minister of Health. And what did he do vis-a-vis tobacco in this country at the time?
Well, John Munro is a young guy then. He's 37. He's a junior cabinet minister in the health portfolio. He's also a 2-pack-a-day smoker, and he's tried to quit many times and can't. So he's very motivated, very passionate about this issue. And so he appeals to Pierre Trudeau to say that the government needs to be more proactive on this measure. He gets a committee in Parliament to investigate the tobacco industry and the issue of smoking and health. And they come back with hard-hitting recommendations against the industry, including a total ban on cigarette advertising. So Munro takes those recommendations to Cabinet, which is very reluctant. The Cabinet is reluctant to go along with this issue, but he takes those recommendations there and gradually gets them to agree to a bill that would have a ban on cigarette advertising in Canada. It's introduced in Parliament, but then no sooner that it's done than the wheels start falling off this wagon of Munro's. Other cabinet ministers become more oppositional, and then effective lobbying comes from the tobacco industry and their newfound allies, who are now the newspaper and magazine publishers, who are not happy about losing that advertising. So it all coalesces basically to kill the bill.
Do you think Monroe was ahead of his time, given that a few decades down the road, this would eventually happen?
Absolutely ahead of his time. In fact, he was at least 2 decades ahead of his time, because it would not be for another 20 years that you would see the federal government actually impose a ban on cigarette advertising in Canada.
Now, if people recognize the name John Monroe a little bit, it's probably not from the smoking campaign that he waged, anti-smoking. It would be from his time hanging out with one of the Beatles in a bed. There we go. John Lennon and Yoko Ono came to Ottawa, and John Monroe got a great photo op with them. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I see a couple ashtrays there, so it tells you about the commonality of them smoking, I guess. He was a colorful figure, right? A dynamic figure. He just didn't have a lot of influence in cabinet in 1968 when he was starting out. He would later in the 70s in different portfolios. You need to be influential in cabinet to really get laws passed.
Let's do another excerpt from the book here, shall we? What few likely realize is that the best years for the Canadian cigarette industry came after smoking and cancer news surfaced in the early 1950s. In 1950, adult per capita cigarette consumption stood at 4.9 cigarettes. In 1960, it reached 7.9, rising steadily thereafter until peaking at 9.6 in 1980. Daniel, that of course makes no sense. The more that we know that smoking causes cancer, the more people smoke. Explain.
That's the central paradox of the book. What essentially happens is that the industry they're able to realize the kind of marketing opportunity that the cancer news presents. And they developed what I call a strategy of hope and doubt. So on the hope side, it involves marketing. And it's effectively presenting health reassurance to smokers in the form of new products that are perceived to be safer than others. So initially, you bring in filters on cigarettes, and then you introduce brands that have low levels of tar and nicotine, and then you introduce light and mild brands in the 70s. And all of this is meant to convey to smokers that there are safer alternatives out there, and so it keeps them in the ranks of smokers. On the doubt side, this is essentially the disinformation campaign that the tobacco industry would run for about 40 years. Effectively, what they did was they just attacked the science linking smoking to cancer and other diseases. They attacked that science over and over again. They also presented dubious alternative explanations for why lung cancer rates were rising. So they said it was things like air pollution or car exhaust fumes or even viruses. So they created doubt in the minds of smokers that way. And I think it was very effective because even by the late 1970s, what you find is that about half of smokers either do not believe in the link between smoking and cancer or are unsure about that link.
I don't know about you, but I'm old enough to remember seeing, I don't know about commercials on television, but certainly ads in newspapers with medical doctors wearing their white coats and stethoscopes around their necks saying, I smoke this brand of cigarette because ... Or in television programs, dramatic or sitcoms or something, there's a doctor smoking cigarettes while attending to a patient. I mean, we look back at this stuff today, and what do we think?
We think it's a different world. Mm-hmm. I mean, it really was a different world. I mean, this was a world where anywhere between 50 and 60% of people smoked, including lots of doctors. I mean, probably a third or more of doctors would be smokers in the 1940s. There's just a greater social acceptance of smoking in people's lives. Even after the cancer link is determined in the 1950s, it still takes a long time for all kinds of sectors of society to distance themselves from smoking.
Now, if you were a smoker in the 1960s and 70s, fast forward, how are you faring today?
Well, if you started smoking in the 60s or 70s, chances are you were a teen because the majority of smokers start before the age of 18. So these people today would be probably in their 60s or 70s. If smoking would prematurely end the lives of about 40% of smokers. So that's about 40,000 Canadians a year. So People who started smoking in their 60s and 70s, probably in the early 2010, started to experience some of the health consequences of that. And that would be things like lung cancer and heart disease and other forms of cancer, respiratory disease. So this is this decade and the previous decade are the times when the health consequences of smoking that started in the 1960s and 70s, when those health consequences occur today. And it's not always the case, though, because some people who started in the 60s and 70s managed to quit, like my mom and dad. And so for them, their health outcomes are going to be much better.
I should put a very odd observation to you. I can remember talking to a health economist many years ago who said, smokers are actually really good for our economy. They pay lots of taxes when they buy their cigarettes. Then they tend to get very sick and die quickly. And therefore, they don't collect their pensions and don't live a long time and drain the healthcare system in the way that others who maybe live into their 80s and 90s and beyond do. Now, it's an immoral position to take, but what do you think about that?
Well, it's certainly immoral in that sense. I mean, I would disagree that they die quickly, because often smoking-related deaths can go on for years. I think the larger issue here is not to think about cost savings or whatever. It's just to think about what kind of a society we could have if, in fact, smoking rates were half of what they are now, or far less than that. I think there would be lots of economic improvements and gain from that kind of society as well.
In which case, who's still smoking today?
Well, in Canada today, about 15% of Canadians smoke cigarettes regularly. That's down from over 50% 60 years ago. So that's a grand achievement in public health. What you do find, though, is higher rates of smoking amongst certain groups, like lower socioeconomic status groups, and you find higher rates of smoking amongst Indigenous Canadians. So, for example, the smoking rate in Nunavut today is over 70%. And there are many Indigenous communities in this country where the smoking rate is 2 or 3 times that of nearby non-Indigenous communities. So smoking remains an important and serious public health issue in Indigenous communities across this country.
I'm sure you and I both well remember when governments really got on the scene on this issue, and they said things like, all right, the days of smoking in movie theaters are over, in elevators are over, in bars or restaurants are over. And there were a lot of people who really objected to that at the time. Any doubt in your mind that with the benefit of hindsight, those were the right moves?
Absolutely, they were the right moves. But remember, those moves only started to really happen in the 1980s. Even though people complained about cigarette smoke in public spaces for decades before that, those moves only happened in the 80s because the issue of smoking and secondhand smoke was redefined as a health issue then, and not just a nuisance issue. And it's really important to understand that when it becomes a health issue, governments tend to respond, not always, but they do tend to respond more so than if it's just a public nuisance issue.
Daniel, I want to show you a couple of pictures here. The greatest singer of all time, in the humble judgment of your friendly correspondent here, was this guy, Francis Albert Sinatra, who somehow managed to live into his 80s despite smoking his whole life. And of course, a lot of people thought Frank was very cool when he smoked. Now, fast forward to this century, and that was a very familiar scene to a lot of people who vaped. And I wonder if you could draw some parallels between the advertisements that we saw in the past, maybe with people like Mr. Sinatra, and how the vape companies of today advertise their wares.
Well, vaping today is a real problem, especially with young people. In Ontario, about 1 in 4 teens now are regular vapers. I mean, that's up from about 10% 3 years ago and up from less than 5% 5 years ago. So a huge increase in teen vaping in this province. And what you've seen with products like Juul and Vape, you see advertising that happens on social media platforms, Instagram, especially a few years ago, this was very prominent. Social media influencers on Instagram and other platforms also promoting vaping devices to teens. Teens today turn to vaping for some of the similar reasons that they turned to cigarettes in the past, although the vapers today, the young ones, for the most part, don't smoke. I mean, we've introduced a generation of young people to nicotine addiction who've never actually smoked cigarettes. So they vape because of the socialization aspects, the fact that they want to belong socially and their friends vape. They vape for stress relief. And they also vape because it's just very easy to do it. You can be very discreet as a vapor, which you can't as a smoker. So a teen could be vaping in his or her bedroom, and the parents can be down the hall, and the parents would never know about it.
Yeah, they've got these things that are all nice and fruity flavored now. So you're right. You really can't tell with vaping the way you can with cigarettes. I'm glad you used the word addiction there, because smoking and vaping, they can be addictions. And I wonder if you think, given that, we're ever going to get to a point in this country where neither of those addictions, we already know they're sort of socially unacceptable, but do you think we'll get to a point where nobody's doing this anymore?
It'll take a while, but I'm hopeful. We've had a long relationship with tobacco, more than 400 years. We've had a short relationship with vaping, but it seems to be an intense one right now. Ultimately, though, to stop nicotine addiction and other forms of addiction like that, you have to have a strong role for government. It's just not going to happen with respect to people figuring these things out on their own so much, and industry doing the right thing. When governments step in and impose harsh restrictions or bans, then the outcomes tend to be much better.
Would you ban vaping today if you could?
I would impose a lot of restrictions on vaping. I don't know if I'd go as far as banning it. I would make it very hard to purchase those products, much harder than it is today. You have to recognize that for some people who are trying to get off cigarettes, vaping can be helpful in that respect. But for the most part, the industry is geared towards young people now who are not smokers, and so we need to shut that down.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for this more than 100-year-long walk through the history of cigarette smoking in this country. That's Daniel Robinson, whose book, Cigarette Nation, Business, Health, and Canadian Smokers, 1930 to 75, has been the subject of our conversation tonight. Take care, Daniel. Good to see you.
Take care. Thanks so much.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, February 10th, 2021. Many assume that when mental illness happens in families, it's for genetic reasons. Tomorrow, we'll find out why new research is calling that assumption into question. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.